I witamy Was, drodzy słuchacze, w środę 13 listopada roku 2013. Mówi do Was z Bielska-Białej Krzysiek Maczyński, realizator dzisiejszego wieczoru, a dzisiejszy wieczór ma tylko jedną, tak się składa, audycję na żywo. Jest to odcinek audycji J.Fijor zaprasza, prowadzi J.Fijor, obecny ze mną tutaj na antenie. Witam Cię, Janku.
Cześć, dobry wieczór.
Dzisiaj będzie odcinek specjalny, to znaczy większość jego po tym naszym wstępie będzie stanowić nagranie wykonane 24 października, czyli w zeszłym miesiącu. Jest ono po angielsku. Janek zaprosił gościa na wywiad. Gościem tym jest M.Klugmann. Janku, jakbyś mógł powiedzieć, co to za gość i co to za wywiad jest. Ja ten wywiad nagrywałem, nawet się tam wypowiadam, jedno pytanie zadaję.
M.Klugmann jest, był doradcą ekonomicznym prezydenta Reagana, jako bardzo młody człowiek. Pisał przemówienia Reaganowi, potem pisał przemówienia George'owi Bushowi ojcu. Jest uczniem Miltona Friedmana, ekonomistą, pracuje w Południowej Ameryce, był przez kilka lat doradcą Pinocheta w Chile, tam go poznałem właśnie. Jest bardzo wolnorynkowo nastawiony i właśnie koncepcja ten leap, czyli ja z tego zrobiłem papę, czyli ten sam skrót, tylko zmieniłem kolejność. PAPE to znaczy prawo, administracja, drugie P to jest polityka i ekonomia. PAPE. Więc to jest to, co się nazywa, co zostało nazwane po naszej audycji pierwszej na temat wolnych miast czy wolnych stref, zostało nazwane drugim Hongkongiem. Więc M.Klugmann już od kilkunastu lat zajmuje się koncepcją właśnie takiej mikroekonomii, to znaczy zastosowania wolnego rynku do przełamywania kryzysów, nędzy, dziadostwa i tak dalej. No i dlatego z nim rozmawiamy, My już jesteśmy na antenie?
Tak, oczywiście, że jesteśmy na antenie.
Okay. Myślałem, że jeszcze sobie tak rozmawiamy. Rozmawiamy z nim dlatego, że było wiele pytań, takich bardzo fundamentalnych, praktycznych, jak te koncepcje prowadzić. I tutaj Mark odpowiada na większość z tych pytań, to znaczy jego odpowiedzi nie są bezpośrednimi odpowiedziami na konkretne pytanie, tylko ja mu zadałem te pytania wcześniej i on jakby skomasował je w jeden koncept, czy sposób myślenia, który może nas doprowadzić właśnie do takiej strefy, do oddzielnej jurysdykcji, czy powiedzmy strefy autonomicznej w ramach państwa polskiego. Nie zdążyliśmy przełożyć tego wywiadu na język polski, ale o ile wiem, to większość słuchaczy zna angielski. Tym niemniej jednak i tak przełożymy, to znaczy Hugo obiecał, że ktoś zrobi transkrypt tego wywiadu. To jest dość długi wywiad. No i tyle. M.Klugmann przyjedzie do Polski pod koniec marca. Chcemy zorganizować z nim duże seminarium, jeszcze kilka ciekawych, interesujących osób zaprosić, żeby porozmawiać, nawet Polaków i takich, bo w Polsce jednak mało kto się nad czymś takim zastanawia, gdzie się boją w ogóle myśleć tymi kategoriami. A ta koncepcja jest całkiem legalna, całkiem atrakcyjna, bardzo atrakcyjna i całkiem możliwa do realizacji. Tylko trzeba to zrobić umiejętnie i właśnie Klugmann nam w tym pomaga. On w tej chwili jest jednym z współtwórców tej koncepcji Charter Cities w Hondurasie. I już w zasadzie po 10 latach po 10 latach przemyśleń, planów, konferencji, koncepcji, prób i błędów, koncepcja ruszyła w tym roku i mamy nadzieję, że w ciągu roku, 2 następnych będzie coś na ten temat więcej wiadomo, to znaczy będą konkretne rezultaty. Byłoby łatwiej, gdyby się taki eksperyment z autonomiczną jurysdykcją w ramach kraju, w którym zachowujemy narodowość, paszport i tak dalej, tylko zmieniamy reguły gry, wyrażamy votum separatum w stosunku do istniejącego porządku personalnego, nie prawnego, bo ten sam system wymiaru sprawiedliwości pozostanie, tylko zmienimy ludzi, chcemy zmienić sposób jego stosowania. Także za chwilę będziecie mieli Klugmana, natomiast dzisiaj muszę wam powiedzieć, że mam 2 dobre wiadomości. Nie jedną dobrą, a drugą złą, tylko 2 dobre, chociaż oczywiście dla niektórych one są obie złe. Tutaj jest najprzyjemniejsza część. Mianowicie kilka dni temu, w tych dniach zakończyło się, to jest pierwsza wiadomość, zakończyło się 3. plenum Komitetu Centralnego Komunistycznej Partii Chin i wiecie co plenum, jakie wytyczne dało na przyszłość najbliższą? To jest chyba najbardziej zaskakująca wiadomość i rzeczywiście w moim mózgu, w moim doświadczeniu dokonuje ona pewnych przewartościowań i jest zaskakująca, jak powiedziałem. Będą w Chinach doskonalić mechanizmy wolnorynkowe. Czyli Komitet Centralny, plenum KC Komunistycznej Partii odchodzi to znaczy jakby rezygnuje z indoktrynacji, rezygnuje z tej wojny ideowej, rezygnuje czy ogranicza interwencjonizm państwa w praktyce na rzecz mechanizmów wolnorynkowych. No to mniód na nasze zmęczone serca i umysły. I druga wiadomość, kto wie, może i jeszcze lepsza, chociaż z pozoru wydaje się głupia, mianowicie jakaś grupa inicjatywna w tak zwanej Unii Europejskiej zaproponowała, żeby każdy członek Unii, czyli każdy obywatel otrzymywał, niezależnie od tego, czy pracuje, czy nie pracuje, otrzymywał tak zwaną pensję minimalną, czy dochód minimalny, który by mu pozwolił żyć. I to jest ta wiadomość, natomiast to, co dobre, to żeby ten pomysł został wprowadzony w życie, stał się propozycją ideową, ustawową, potrzebne jest 1 000 000 podpisów. I chodzą, i zbierają, i nie mogą zbierać. Nie uzbierali nawet 250 000. Także mimo dużej ilości meneli w Unii Europejskiej, bezdomnych, różnych innych ofiar, nie udało się 1 000 000 podpisów zebrać pod jednym z najgłupszych pomysłów, jakie sobie można wyobrazić, czyli głupota jednak przegrywa. No i tymi 2 dobrymi wiadomościami chciałbym pożegnać was. Krzysztof będzie czuwał nad przebiegiem tych taśm, nie, bo teraz już nie taśmy, tylko jakie fale, nie? Cyfry.
No, to jest w postaci cyfrowej, tak?
Posłuchacie rozmowy z Markiem Klugmannem. Jak macie jakieś pytania, problemy, ja wiem, że są, bo czytam, ale zbieram to dlatego, że jeszcze wrócimy do Klugmana. Poza tym Mark mi napisał tekst, ja próbuję z tego zrobić artykuł, myślę, że może gdzieś do prasy byśmy to dali. Chciałbym, żebyśmy mieli przemyślany problem, dlatego żeby nie być na idiotów, żeby nie być na jakichś utopistów, którym się mrzy czy marzy o szczęście. No to dobrej nocy. Krzysiu, powodzenia, dziękuję. Będę się przysłuchiwał co jakiś czas.
No to żegnam Cię, Janku, dobrej nocy
Cześć.
również, a tutaj na czacie jeszcze tak skomentuję. W ogóle powiem, słuchacie kontestacji Radia Ludzi Wolnych, w którym leci ta audycja. J.Fijor zaprasza. Ryndiuk na czacie kontestacyjnym się zapytuje, czy wywiad ma tylko formę audio, czy również wideo. Jest audio, no do wideo zostanie dorobiony pewnie jakiś statyczny obrazek czy coś i będą napisy. Zapewne będzie to na YouTubie opublikowane przez kontestację. Tam można zrobić tak, żeby był wybór napisów polskich i angielskich, bo oprócz polskich całkiem możliwe, że będą też angielskie. A teraz zostawiam Was już z nagraniem.
Okay, go ahead. And Mark asked me a question. You asked me a question on surface.
Yeah, you said about 300,000 square kilometers.
312,000 square kilometers. Yes.
Huge. That's great. Okay.
That's huge. It's 38 million people.
Perfect.
So we are the one, I mean, after this 25 countries, no, the first was 10 countries, then there was 15 countries added in 2004. So among those 15 new countries, the Poland was the biggest one. So, but we are, I don't know. Now, Chris, you know what population-wise, we are number 5 or 6 in Europe?
I think 6.
Let's say Germany, Italy, England, France, Spain, Poland. 6. We are 6. Number 6. Maybe Ukraine. Yeah, Ukraine is in Poland. Number 7. I don't know. Yeah, number 7. So, I mean, Poland changes. It's growing, and you know, the private sector is growing, but the government sector is in a deep shit. Okay, Mark.
Right.
So you can start. Can you start asking questions, responding to questions now?
How do you want to? I would usually not begin directly with these questions. They're a bit more technical. I would usually want to give sort of the concept in some sense.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know how to ask.
The way I would really begin, based on what you're saying, is something like this: that right now in Poland, for people who want a better future for themselves and their country, that there are two options, and the two options are not competing parties. One option is to leave the country,
yes,
and go to England or Ireland or Germany, and then the second option is to try and fight inside this electoral system, so that eventually there might be a democratic consensus. And that what that means is at some point that people who think like you become 51%, and then you can impose your ideas on the 49% who don't understand or don't agree.
Right.
But to really do big change, then you need a large mandate. And that means you need to get 70% of the voters to agree. That usually means you have to have a national crisis plus a strong leader. And then there's a mandate to impose their vision on the other third of the country, which is good unless you're in the other third of the country.
Yeah.
That sometimes happens.
Right.
And essentially the leap zones is to say those two options, they exist. People who want to can dedicate their lives in those ways, but it's time for a third option.
But the question, the most important and most often asked question is about practical possibility to establish LEAP. Yeah, it's a leap zone. It's very people like it. People like it and people accept it, but they are afraid that this is impossible. That this is something unrealistic. So try to.
It's actually pretty easy to do. It's easy in a political sense. It's easy in a technical sense. The first reason it's easy is it's non-confrontational. It's not built on conflict. And that's not just a theory of saying that I believe it's not based on conflict, but if someone had said to you 30, 40 years ago that the transformation of the communist socialist economic model in China, 1 billion people, could be carried out in a manner that would be free of revolution, of civil war, of the conflict that you would expect, of a complete change of model, you would have said that would be very difficult. But what did Deng Xiaoping do? He found tiny pieces of land. He started with 4 of them, far from the capital, that were too small and too empty to fight over, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were too small and they were too empty to fight over. And he said to the rest of the country, he said to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, he said, guys, just keep doing whatever you're doing. I'm just going to go over here on the south coast for a few minutes and I'll be back. And that was all it really took. That was all it required. In essence, when you're talking about a country of 312,000 square kilometers, such as Poland, and you realize that everything that you need to do, you can do in 1/3 of 1% of the land. And you can do this in land that does not have what today is understood as economic importance. It would not be done on top of an existing population. It's not being done by force. You're not taking things away from people who have them and want to keep them. And you compare that to everything else that happens in politics, and you say, well, this is so much easier. Because everything else that we do in politics is based on confrontation. It's based on forming a majority to dominate those who are not in the majority, right?
Right.
And to take away something that someone has and doesn't want to give up, or to impose a change on someone who didn't ask for and may not agree and does not want that change. I mean, so the standard way of doing things is enormously difficult, and that's why the results are so bad. Instead, if you say, listen, let's create a special legal, economic, administrative, political zone, a special jurisdiction, we can do it. Paris is 100 square kilometers. 2 million people live very well in Paris in just 100 square kilometers. In Singapore, 5 million people live with a per capita income of $62,000 a year. So this is about 4 or 5 times what is estimated for Poland.
Yeah.
And they live on 700 square kilometers. 700 square kilometers is what percentage of the land of Poland?
700, it's 0.25.
Right?
Yeah, percent, yeah.
Yeah, it's too small to fight over. 0.25%.
So you think it's enough? It is enough?
Well, it's enough for 5 million people.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we need to impose an idea on 100% of a population.
Of course.
I think part of the problem, the approach that gets taken, is if every idea has to be imposed on the people who don't agree, then everything is a conflict. And then they say, no, we'll compromise and negotiate. The effect there is every good idea gets destroyed, or it gets contaminated, or it gets diluted, or it gets poorly executed. It's never really the thing that it needs to be. So the first important point is it's really not necessary to get into a conflict around this. The economic benefits for all of Poland, and in fact for the European Union, to have a space inside of Poland that can be the size of Singapore. It could even begin as the size of Paris. Paris, 100 square kilometers. Singapore, 700 square kilometers.
So Singapore is bigger. I'm sorry for interruption, but Singapore is bigger than Paris?
Speaking of, well, you know how cities, they grow beyond their legal borders.
Oh, I know.
Okay? The official legal border of Paris is where 2 million people live.
Uh-huh.
It's 100 square kilometers. Singapore is an island. It's 700 square kilometers.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
Hong Kong is 1,100 square kilometers. So it's about 1/3 of 1% of Poland. Mm-hmm. 7 million people live there. in Hong Kong, they have a per capita income of $50,000. That's higher than the per capita income in most countries of the EU, in fact, right?
Yeah, right.
So essentially, everything that you would wish for can be done in less than 1% of the land. And it doesn't mean getting in a fight with people who are already living there. You can find places where there are not many people live there. What Deng Xiaoping in China did, he went to a fishing village in 1980 it's spelled Shenzhen, it's pronounced Shenzhen. It's now the most famous of the special economic zones. In this part of China now, 11 million people live there. At that time, only 30,000 people lived there. In a country of 1,000 million people, only 30,000 people lived there. In essence, it meant no one. It was empty. By voluntary choice, 11 million people have moved there. And they've become prosperous. And more people wanted to move there, but instead they just created more and more special economic zones. Today in China, there are over 100 different special zones of various types. Now, what China has not done, and which I think Poland would want to do, and which we're doing in Honduras, is to learn from the wisdom of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, who understood that it's not just about economic policies, it's not just about taxes, it's not just about currency, it's not just about free trade. It's also about courts and judges and rule of law and transparency and an administration and political stability, a governance model. So when Lee Kuan Yew took Singapore to independence in 1965, he didn't say, my goal is to create a credible judiciary. He didn't say, I hope one day to have good institutions. He said, no. Institutions are so important. That's not the goal. That's the starting point. If you want to start a restaurant, you can't say, my goal is to one day have food that tastes good. No, don't open a restaurant until you have food that tastes good. So if you're creating a jurisdiction, or if you're creating a new country like Singapore, how do you begin on your first day saying, we have a very credible judiciary? The same way, if you open a restaurant in Warsaw, you need on your very first day you're open for business to say, we have very good food and it's available, it's for sale. Not, we hope in a few years to have that, please come now. So he said, I will use the Supreme Court of Great Britain, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. That will be the Supreme Court in Singapore.
For clearing, Supreme Court they are not going to replace Polish judges. They are going to create a Supreme Court for this LEAP zone, right?
Well, in the case of the LEAP zone, in the Honduran design, there is a separate judiciary. There's also a separate judicial framework that relies heavily on the use of arbitration. We're talking now to the leading arbitration forums in the world to reach agreements where they will provide some of these services. It's a method called institutional leapfrogging, where you identify where do credible institutions already exist, and you say, we will use those, and they can be done either through insourcing or through outsourcing. Lee Kuan Yew did it through outsourcing. He said that court in London will be the one we use. It already exists. In Dubai, about 7 years ago, when they wanted to create the Dubai International Financial Center, they did institutional leapfrogging, but through insourcing. What they did is they hired very distinguished judges from the UK, from Singapore, and from New Zealand, established a special court, said these very distinguished people are the Supreme Court judges. and they will operate with independence and under British common law. So they're using the institutional leapfrogging by taking advantage of pre-existing institutional culture, pre-existing institutional credibility, pre-existing institutional experience, pre-existing institutional familiarity, and they're fast-forwarding and installing it immediately. And it can either be they take it where it's available and they install it within their own space, or they do it through an outsourcing and make it available in the place where it already exists. Now, in Mauritius, they also use the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, but what they've started doing is the senior judges from England, from Great Britain, once or twice a year come, often with their wives, and they visit Mauritius, and they get a villa on the beach, and their wives take tea on the beach, and the judges go into the city to hear the cases, and then at the end of the day, they go back to the villa on the beach and have gin and tonic. And they do this for a couple of weeks, usually when the weather is very cold in London and the weather is very nice in Mauritius. And then they finish and then they fly back to London. So there are lots of different ways that this can be arranged. In each case, it will be done based on the local preferences and circumstances. But the objective is very clear. You don't say we're going to try and improve our existing institutions. To create a credible institution requires a period of time that exceeds a human lifespan. You can't wait that long. You need to begin with credible institutions. So in a leap zone, you begin with highly credible, world-class judicial and dispute resolution procedures and institutions. That's a starting point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're not imposing this on top of a pre-existing population. You're saying we're creating this zone, and if you like this, please come. And if you don't like this, this will not touch you, and it won't take anything from you. And that the purpose is to create the most competitive investment and production space within the European Union. That's what Poland can do. And it's something that the European Union urgently needs. Because the European Union, and I think Vladimir Bukovsky has written about this years ago, it suffers from some of the design problems of the old Soviet Union. It's very rigid. It's very centralized. It's very bureaucratic. It's very inflexible. It's very slow. These are problems we've seen before, haven't we? And we know the weakness of these things. We were all surprised at how, well, maybe not you, Jen, but many people were surprised at how quickly the Soviet system collapsed. And that's because a rigid system is also very precarious. It's very fragile. And a lot of us are surprised by how durable the regime of China has been. Well, it's a system based on high degrees of local autonomy. It's an economy built on these very flexible special zones. It takes the rigidity out of the system. These are articulations. They're like joints. It's like when you construct a building in an earthquake zone, rather than making the building very strong and very rigid, they build flexibility into the structure so that it can move a little bit instead of breaking. China, by using special zones, creates that type of flexibility. That's why the regime, with all the changes going on in the world, the technological changes, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rise of Islam, changes in commodity prices, currencies, that regime is very durable. It has passed through all these processes of change. The European Union will be the biggest beneficiary if Poland creates an innovation zone based on a leap, legal, economic, administration, political jurisdiction. Otherwise, the rate of technological change in the world will be so much faster than what the Brussels bureaucracy can process and authorize.
Mark, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
Okay. I understand and I accept, and most of people will accept, but there's two questions. I mean, it's one question. How should we talk to the government or to the, I don't know, prime minister or minister or, voivodeship, governor, and explain what you are talking now to them, and say, listen, we're gonna create a zone, and everything will be fine. It will be growing better. People will live better. But they can say, okay, regardless, our constitution says Poland is one. I forgot the name. I mean, it cannot be divisible.
A unitary state. It's a unitary state.
Yes. That's the one problem. And the second one, what if you find this let's say 700 square kilometers, and there will be, let's say 100,000 people, you have to ask them how to start, how to make a first step.
Okay. The first step is, I would not suggest beginning with a location. The reason is that the choice of a location should be flexible. It should not be a place where there already are 100,000 people. It's a matter of looking at a map and identifying what are the spaces. It maybe is a size of 100 square kilometers. You would want proximity to a good seaport or to a good airport. But that's available. In terms of the Constitution, in the case of Honduras, as an example, the special jurisdiction exists under the national flag. It does not issue its own passports. It does not have a separate military. So it's part of the national constitutional system. However, there was a constitutional reform in order to establish certain forms of autonomy. And we see within the European Union numerous examples where there are spaces with certain degrees of autonomy that exist within EU states, right?
Right, like Andorra, for example?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's Andorra. There are the Channel Islands of the UK.
Yeah.
There's the Basque region of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
There are, there's certain spaces, between Switzerland and Italy that have their own identities. San Marino,
yes.
So you have the regional relationships within Great Britain of Wales and Scotland.
The island Man.
The island of Man. So sometimes it's based on geography, sometimes it's based on history, sometimes it's based on language and ethnicity. There are lots of reasons for these things. In the case of Poland, what it could be based on a desire for leadership. A desire to be able to say that the most competitive space today in the European Union, where there is strong rule of law, highly competitive economic policies, world-class judicial credibility, and a stable and transparent system of governance exists within Poland, under the Polish flag, but with a unique jurisdictional status that would be based on, each country needs to decide whether it wants to reform its constitution. Frankly, I think if that's acceptable within the Poland's political context, I think that's the best way to do it, because it gives potential investors certainty. And here's the thing, wages to a large degree are a function of the amount of capital mobilized behind each employee, behind each worker. And if you want workers who are highly paid, it means you must create a jurisdiction where investors are willing to mobilize a lot of capital based on long-term projects. When you have low credibility in the judicial or political stability in a space, the amount of capital and the time horizon of that capital is much shorter. And as a result, you don't create the basis for having such high wages. So this could be a space, instead of doing what special zones try and do in some countries, is compete by paying workers less, which is what you see in Latin America. It's what you see in the developing world. They say, come invest here because you won't have to pay any taxes and you can pay our workers less than you're paying. So right now, when Poland goes to Germany and says to German companies, please put your plant in Poland instead of Germany, the explanation of why they should invest in Poland is because you can pay us less.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a great way of competing if what you want to do is give people a better opportunity. So what happens instead? The workers in Poland who say, if that's the way we're selling ourselves to the world, I think I'll move to Germany and get paid more. I think I'll move to England and Ireland and get paid more.
Right.
If instead the economic ideas that you are advocating so effectively in Poland, if you instead say, no, the reason for the capital to come to the special leap zone in Poland is because this is the most competitive economic space in Europe. In all of Europe, it has the most attractive economic model. And in addition to that, through institutional leapfrogging, rather than be an emerging judicial regime, what we have here is the implementation through institutional leapfrogging of pre-existing world-class judicial arrangements. That is, you simply do it instantly, so that it's not the existing judiciary that has jurisdiction in the leap zone, and you create a governance model. It's not the existing political powers and political parties and politicians and governing institutions. It is a separate administrative regime. So the investors have the confidence that this is a space where administration takes place in an efficient and transparent, pro-growth, pro-innovation manner, and that things move at the speed of business and markets and technology in the 21st century, and not at the speed of politicians and bureaucracy from the 20th century.
Okay, but we have some. This leap zone must include some federal institutions, and are they going to comply with the new approach?
What federal institutions are you thinking
For
of?
example, we can have a state-owned railroad company, or there will be a airport owned by the government, central government.
You're saying that there would be a pre-existing airport or a pre-existing seaport?
Seaport or riverport or something like this, but they are owned by the federal government, by the central government.
Right. Okay. I would suggest that for the effectiveness of the leap zone, it would be important for this infrastructure to be placed under the jurisdiction of the special zone. So there would, in that case, if it's pre-existing federal infrastructure, there would be a transfer of authority. Now, it's possible that a sufficient degree of confidence can be obtained through a contractual arrangement and through a legislative framework that is not the full transfer of jurisdiction. That is, it can be done by contract, it can be done by law, or maybe it requires a transfer of property. That is, there are a lot of mechanical ways of doing this.
Okay.
And there will be local decisions based on what is acceptable within the customs and politics of that space, and equally important, within the customs and politics of that space, how definitive must it be for it to be reliable and trustworthy that it will be lived up to? Those two things. So yes, the other option is you create new infrastructure, which can be done through private investment.
Yes.
That is, if that becomes the issue, then you say, that's okay, just keep doing, look, in Shenzhen, there was nothing there. Deng didn't get in a fight with the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, saying, I can only do this if I convince the commissars in Beijing that they must give up power over something that they control and believe is very valuable. He didn't do that. He didn't say, listen, there's an airport in Beijing and I want it for something else. That would have been a fight, right?
Right.
At a minimum, it would have been a negotiation. Instead, in the single-party communist system, he reduced what was required down to something that was so minimal and where there was no sense of anyone giving up anything they already had and valued, that it wasn't worth fighting over. In addition, everyone understood that there was a problem. So today, I think there's a majority of people in Poland who understand there's a problem. What they don't have is an agreement on what the solution is. And there's not going to be a good agreement on a solution if only thing that gets proposed are solutions that impose change on people who don't agree with the change. Right. There's not going to be a solution that way.
Yes.
Yet all the great ideas essentially come down to that. So the people who agree with you and me, they fly to Poland and they come to say everything that Jan is saying, it must be done, and here's the legislation and we can transform Poland. Well, let's think about that. They're saying we'll transform the circumstances, the rules, the laws, the economic and political arrangements that exist today for 38 million people in 312,000 square kilometers, and then we're surprised if there's a fight, or we're surprised if it doesn't happen quickly. We've defined our instrument in such a way that the real chances of it being successfully executed are very low if we believe that the path to getting where we want to get is about bringing change to an entire country. If the starting point of Deng Xiaoping, if he had done it the way we try and do it as classical liberals in the 21st century, it wouldn't have worked. Because what would he have done? Well, what we do, let's begin by proposing incremental change across the entire country and population. Let's begin by identifying pre-existing arrangements like state-owned companies that have been taken control by interest groups, and let's fight them to remove them from their control. So, let's begin with a fight. Let's begin with an arrangement where the only way we win is if the people who disagree with us must lose. That's not a winning strategy. It hasn't worked very well. The other mistake that we make is we fail to incorporate an integrated four-legged model. We have a single leg, the economic leg. It's like a chair with one leg. It's better than not having any chair, but it's not a stable solution. Unless you incorporate legal institutions, judges, courts, systems of law, and unless you incorporate a political model, a governance model, where it doesn't all get taken away from you every time there's an election and you might lose it, and where the rules of the game can change if a politician comes in who has different ambitions, and it doesn't include an administrative model that guarantees that what is written down is what actually gets done, and that it's done in a transparent and efficient and credible manner. If it doesn't incorporate these elements, it's not really going to produce what we expect and hope it will produce. There's a reason why Singapore is one of the richest countries in the world, maybe the richest. For a country of 5 million in its population category, to find a space that's richer than that, you have to go to these micro-states that have fewer than 1 million people. There's a reason for it. Because they have a world-class system of justice, excellent economic policies, a transparent and efficient system of administration, and enormous stability in governance under rule of law.
But most of critics of this leap concept, they say, yeah, it is possible to create the leap zone in Singapore or Hong Kong because these are small entities. But if it comes to France or Guatemala even, that's too big and it's impossible. So they think the success of Singapore and Taiwan or Hong Kong is based on the smaller, I mean, the small size, which is not true.
Since you and I first met many years ago, what has been the fastest growing country in the world?
Chile, yeah?
No, China.
China, yeah, China, yeah. There was already China, right?
Yeah. Okay, so in fact, the fastest growing country in the world is also
one of the biggest,
with the largest population in the world. So the idea that, China in your lifetime, China, frankly, just in the last 35 years, has gone from a per capita income 35 years ago, would it have been $200 a year? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but very low, right?
Yeah.
It was a terribly poor country. Singapore in 1965 had a per capita income of, I think it was $600 per year. Today it's $62,000 per year.
100 times more.
Yeah. In other words, the real rate of growth that's possible is absolutely astonishing. And in terms of the size of Poland can either be an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on how you do it.
Right.
If the way you do it is say we need to impose this on a lot of people and confront a lot of existing interests, then it's a disadvantage. On the other hand, if you say we're going to create a highly functional space that's too small and too empty to fight over, but we will have the leverage of 38 million people who can, through self-selection, choose to come and be part of this, to add value through their human capital, then it's a huge asset the size of Poland. The reason that China has proven this to be such a huge asset is they have 1 billion people. So if you have self-selection of a population, the 11 million people who choose to go and live in the special economic zone of Shenzhen, this is a process of self-selection, right?
Yeah. Voluntarily, they changed their location voluntarily. Yeah.
Right. So of 38 million people, you know what? Think of who will be the first 500,000 people who say, I want to go there. And the other way of asking the question is, what is Poland losing in the next 100,000 people who leave Poland to go to the UK or Germany or Canada or the US or Singapore? What is Poland losing? Because that's also self-selection.
Right.
So you create a space which is defined, essentially the way I frame this is we should negotiate over land, not over the model. Design the model that is a reasonable model, that's practical and that works, and then apply it over a piece of land which can be negotiated the size of the land. Because really, if you're not talking about agriculture or mining, the size of the land is just not very important. Singapore is actually a major manufacturing center. It's 700 square kilometers, but they have a manufacturing industry that I think is a third of their economy. 700 square kilometers.
Unbelievable.
Exactly. There's a complete blind spot that we all have about the size of areas, about the size of land. So when I say to you, how much land do you need for 2 million people to live elegantly as they live in Paris? No one would say, I think 100 square kilometers, that's enough. But it is enough. I mean, the reality is on 1% of the land of Poland, half the population could live and much more relaxed and comfortable and spread out than they do in Paris. You can do the math.
Yeah, right.
So we must not get in fights about land. We must not get in fights about taking things away from interest groups that value those things. We must concentrate all the people who agree and who have a special interest. For example, there are people whose passion is educational reform, right?
Right.
What are their real chances of imposing across the entire Polish educational system their new ideas?
Yeah, like they did recently. They reduced the age for kids to start a school from 7 to 6. That's
okay. That's the level of change they produce.
Yes.
That's kind of trivial change, frankly, right?
Yeah.
Compared to the real big ideas of how education can be structured to increase innovation and competitiveness in the 21st century. But you have a teachers union, I imagine, right?
Yeah. Very strong one.
That's
strong.
right. You have an education bureaucracy, an education ministry.
Absolutely, yes.
They're very powerful interest groups. So what we need to say is to your friends who have new ideas about education and who've spent the last 10 years getting in usually unproductive fights with the teachers union and the education bureaucracy, so you need to tell them, stop doing it. Instead, come with us and be part of the Leap Zone project, because there, within our new jurisdiction, we are born without any presumption around the maintenance and continuity of old arrangements of how a school system should operate. We're starting something new, and we want you to be part of it. And you do this also with medical care. There are people who have different ideas about how to organize medical care and deliver better medical services with 21st century technology. And you say, instead of fighting the medical establishment, and instead of saying you want to try your new ideas on 38 million people to see how it works, don't. No, come, be part of the Leap Zone project, because there's going to be a new arrangement, and people who like it will come, and people who don't like it, it's not being imposed on them. So it becomes a center of innovation. It becomes a center of rule of law. That's the other part of it. That is, rather than going through this very slow evolution of increasing levels of transparency and rule of law that occurs across human generations within a political system, you create a space where you hardwire into the design the critical elements of rule of law. You also create a governance framework where from the top is constructed around the values and principles of rule of law. You also have a process of self-selection where the population who wants to go there is a population that is choosing something that values rule of law. So the expectations are completely different. In addition, the original purpose that's being created, if you're creating a center for exports, for the international attractiveness of investment to come to Poland, so you need to establish and maintain these levels of standards so that you're able to compete with all the high-wage locations in the European Union, not by offering lower wages, but by offering greater degrees of institutional flexibility and efficiency.
And guarantees for the business.
And guarantees. You want to be able to say your property rights are going to be as well protected because we're using the same structures and the same people as they would be protected in Germany or Ireland or the UK. They will be protected here. And the rules of the game, there's a framework which locks in for a period of 20 years the rules of the game. The model that, there are many governance models. The one that I designed and that was used in the Honduran case, which may have some familiarity within your framework, is a board of trustees, an international board of trustees, where essentially the maximum authority, which is there to guarantee that the framework is maintained and that has the power to appoint and fire the executive authority, is the board of trustees of people who are chosen because of their commitment to a set of principles and who have demonstrated through their work and their life that this is what they value and wish to bring into existence. And they bring with them a set of values and a set of expectations. It's the people who you know from many countries around the world, which includes distinguished scholars and academics. It includes prominent judges and magistrates. It includes very famous and innovative entrepreneurs and business leaders. It contains many people of many different categories, but given that the purpose, you see, is to create a center for attracting investment from around the world under the guarantee that the highest world-class standards will be observed, it makes sense to have a maximum board that draws upon people from around the world who represent these standards. That's why, for example, in Dubai, when they created an international financial center with a judiciary, they brought in judges from common law jurisdictions like Singapore, New Zealand, and Great Britain. They didn't say, oh, we need to find judges from within Dubai. Well, they weren't trying to attract investment from within Dubai, were they? They were trying to attract investment from where the money is. Now, where does the money go? It's very interesting. In Bloomberg, they had an article about the Russian billionaires. Where do the Russian billionaires keep their wealth?
Outside of Russia.
Yeah. What you find is overwhelmingly, according to the Bloomberg report, in jurisdictions of British common law. Overwhelmingly.
Oh, yeah?
Well, okay, maybe the Russian billionaires know something. For some reason, the Emir of Dubai, he created the International Financial Center, said, I want British common law. For some reason, Singapore, when it took independence, instead of saying we resent our former colonial master, said, no, we want to keep British common law, and in fact, we want to use the courts in London. Having said that, Russian billionaires also have their wealth in Switzerland. So that's not British common law. It's a hybrid system in Switzerland. So there are different ways of structuring it as long as everyone is clear what the objective is. Now, what is the test? How do you know if you've accomplished a successful leap jurisdiction? It happens after a certain period of time. If it's been accomplished, means that the international agencies that rate country risk will assign a different risk rating to the special jurisdiction than it does to the general regime. In the same way that the rating of Hong Kong, part of China, is different from the rating for China, correct?
Right, correct, yes.
Okay? The other thing that happens, however, which we know because we've observed it happen, it's empirical, is the zone exerts an example. It influences the opinions in the rest of the country because most people are not ideological. Most people are not theoretical. Most people are empirical and visual. They look and they see what works. They don't know why it works.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using a device right now that makes it possible for us to speak with each other. I have no idea how it works.
Yeah.
I know that it works. That's all that matters to me.
Right.
And that's the truth for most people in terms of legal, economic, administrative, political arrangements. Where the leap elements are good, money and population go. And they leave places where the leap, the legal, economic, administrative, political elements are bad or not as good. Yet the people who are making the move are not able to explain and don't really understand what is it about the legal, economic, administrative, political arrangements in the place that I'm leaving and the ones in the place I'm going to. They can't explain it. And Deng Xiaoping understood it wasn't going to be necessary for them to explain it. That people would discover that they had more opportunity, they were better paid, and they could get rich in the special economic zones. That there'd be abundant consumer goods. That there'd be a better life. And that was enough. So what Deng Xiaoping understood is that the way to transform your country is don't begin by trying to transform your country. The way to transform your country is take a tiny space and get it right. Produce it so that it will work. The person who didn't understand this, and a lot of people have suffered because he didn't understand this, was Helmut Kohl in Germany. Even today, you compare the Deng Xiaoping and Helmut Kohl. Each one of them faced a very similar question. At the time of the reunification of Germany, Helmut Kohl said, I have this whole area that operates under a socialist economic model, right?
Right.
What do I do to fix it? And Deng Xiaoping, 10, 11 years before Helmut Kohl had that question, had the same question. It was China. He said, I have this whole area that operates under the socialist economic model. What do I do to fix it? Well, what Helmut Kohl did was very poor results. To this day, the eastern states of Germany are much poorer than the rest of Germany, right?
Right.
Whereas the zones where Deng Xiaoping introduced his reforms are the richest part of China and are some of the fastest growing economies in the world. What a difference, right?
Right.
The eastern states of Germany live on subsidies and welfare and have low wages and low competitiveness.
Yeah.
If instead Helmut Kohl had said, you know what, I'm simply going to copy what's working in China. Because those special zones began in 1980. By the time you got to 1989, 1990, 1991, it was perfectly clear that it was working. And he said, what I want to do is create spaces in the former East Germany, zones.
Right.
Voluntary spaces that people who like it can go there. We're not going to do it on top of everyone. That will be the most competitive spaces in all of Europe. It'll be the place where entrepreneurs anywhere in Europe say, that's where I want to be. Because I'll be under the stability of the governance model of the Federal Republic of Germany. And I'll put judicial transparency there. But I'll have highly competitive economic arrangements. And I'll have an administrative framework without the bureaucracy we have here in Germany. As soon as there's a space within the European Union, which could be in Poland, without the bureaucracy and the slow movement of policy and the regulation and the excessive taxation in some countries, but also with rule of law, judicial transparency, political stability, that becomes the most attractive place in Europe. Now, within the EU framework, what it means doing on the economic part is to identify what, for each of the relevant economic policies, which is the EU country that has the very best, and simply copy them. That way Brussels can't object. You're saying, no, we have the right to do something that's being done in any other EU country, don't we? And Brussels would say, well, yes, I guess you do. Say, okay, good. So we'll take the labor law from this country, and we'll take the bankruptcy law from that country, and we'll take the environmental protection law and the consumer protection law and different, from these other countries. Now, once you do that, suddenly it's the most attractive framework of economic policy anywhere in Europe because you did that by design, right?
Right.
You began that. Then you create a judicial framework using institutional leapfrogging. So you're able to say the level of property rights, the enforceability of contracts, the efficiency in dispute resolution, the judicial transparency is on the same level as the best we find in international levels. And then you have a governance model where this semi-autonomous space, instead of, having the bureaucracy in the national capital government, you have a board of trustees as the maximum supervisor, and they appoint a strong executive. They're with mission to produce a high growth, high innovation, high transparency, high competitive whole for development, center for development. That's the mission. Everyone agrees that that's the mission. In terms of the internal politics in Poland, the ability of a politician to offer the immediate chance for young people who otherwise have to leave to find those opportunities in their own country is very powerful. The ability to say, we have a plan that this will become the fastest growing country in Europe, that's very attractive. We have a plan where we can produce 2 million new jobs in a certain period of time, private sector, high wage jobs in growing industries. That's very attractive.
Yeah.
In fact, the politician or the party that is against this is at an immediate disadvantage. Why? Because you're not imposing this on any pre-existing population. It's all voluntary. It's in a limited space. You're not taking anything away from anybody.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm afraid I have a question, for example, regarding coal and East Germany. Didn't he know that there is a way to create the eastern part of Germany as a special zone to attract new investors, or he was afraid to do it because of political reasons? What is your opinion on this?
I think it was a lack of imagination more than anything. That is what you generally find, and it's almost completely separate from the ideology or economic concepts of whoever you're talking to. People talk in terms of whole countries. That is, the unit that they believe requires their attention is an entire country and population. That's their starting point. The reason results in the world are not very good, in part, is because that's a mistake. We know it's a mistake because look at how better it worked out when Deng Xiaoping said, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it a different way.
It was some, I didn't follow that, the beginning of Chinese reforms. Did Deng Xiaoping, did he have some, opposition to his way, to his change reforms?
Well, here's what he did. In 1978, he came to power. He was able to move fairly quickly to do some agricultural reforms of household responsibility. The reason he could do this is because people were starving.
Yeah.
And it meant that the population would be able to eat. They'd be able to grow their own food and eat. This gave him political support. This did not produce a political a political conflict that weakened him. It actually gave him a base of support and neutralized the risk of the population being against. But then, that same year, 1978, he spent a week in Singapore talking with Lee Kuan Yew. He came back from Singapore, he came back from Singapore having seen it and getting advice from a very intelligent, wise leader, which Lee Kuan Yew certainly is. And instead of saying, I'm going to follow the Washington consensus and I'm going to begin privatizing industries and I'll begin doing financial and economic reform on a national level, he focused on creating these tiny special zones. There were 4 of them initially. There was one of them contiguous with Hong Kong, another contiguous with Macau, and then I think there were 2 that were across the straits from Taiwan, adjacent to Taiwan. And the one that's most famous is Shenzhen, pronounced Shenzhen. But in fact, they became the laboratory for change. So instead of saying that the whole country is the laboratory, he said, no, the laboratory is the laboratory. And instead of saying the whole population is the animal we experiment on, he said, no, we're not going to experiment on people. People by self-selection will choose to come if they like it. And they'll choose to stay if it works. So Kohl, because West Germany was a successful country, he didn't feel there was anything left to learn. He said, we have something that works, and now we will incorporate into what works. He had no theory of change. Do you see the difference between, I'll give you an example. Suppose in Warsaw, there's a McDonald's restaurant, right?
Right. Plenty.
They sell hamburgers.
Yeah.
And there's also a Pizza Hut. They sell pizza, right?
Right.
Okay. Suppose the owner of the McDonald's says, I want to buy that location. He says, starting on Monday, it becomes a McDonald's. That's what Helmut Kohl thought he was going to do with Eastern Germany. He had no theory. He had no theory of change. For example, what he didn't say is, okay, but how do I take a man who's only trained to make pizza in an oven and make him understand how to make fried potatoes? What is the process of change of how you convert a pizza chef into a man who makes French fries? It's different skills. They work at a different speed. They're different factors, right?
Right.
Deng Xiaoping had a theory of change, which is that you begin with a small space and you do a big change in a small space, as opposed to doing an incremental change on a large space. What Mao did at the Chinese Revolution was very violent and obviously Marxist, but the theory of change was more similar to Helmut Kohl's theory of change, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
That is, each man, Helmut Kohl, who was right, and Mao, who was wrong, and Helmut Kohl, who was essentially a decent man, and Mao, who was a monster, they each believed that they had a very good idea and they knew what worked. And because of that, they each believed what we must now do is impose this new arrangement on top of an entire territory and an entire population. Correct?
Right.
Now, the reason Mao is a monster is because his ideas were very bad. Whereas what Helmut Kohl did, these were not terrible ideas. They weren't experiments. It was what already existed in West Germany. He thought it was great. But what he hadn't figured out, was how do you get this process of change to take place? He didn't understand there should be a process of self-selection, that you should create something that's not the same, but that in fact is better, more attractive, and more competitive than what you have that's working. That is, he didn't say, let's use this as an opportunity to create something that is better than what exists today in West Germany. He didn't do that. He said, no, let's get them to be the same as West Germany. And of course, they never have been.
Yeah, I think that after your lecture now, I'm confident in this idea. I mean, we can talk to people. We don't want to fight. We don't want to change. We just want to voluntarily, like you call it, self-voting, or how do you call it?
Self-selection.
Self-selection, yeah.
Yeah, it's a voluntary choice that each individual and their family can make. This is a space that includes a residential space. So you can also have people who live outside the zone and come into the special zone to work. It would be open to any citizen of Poland. It would not be imposed on people. And it brings benefits to the entire country.
Yeah, and an example for the other for entire country, but it's a threat for politicians. But I mean, it could be threat or could not, because if they are following our changes and if they are following which is right or which is good for people, they will be happy. The people that will vote for them. Otherwise, they're gonna lose. I'm talking to politicians. Mark, I think that we already passed 1 hour, and everything was such a consistent and greasy that there's no room for editing. The show is 1 hour long, so we can extend for like hour and 10 minutes. So we gonna broadcast everything what you said. I don't know if it will be in English or we try to place some the translation. I think the translation we will do a transcript of your speech, and then in English and in Polish.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, let's start. You know, I think that we look. We have a small party. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a thank you so much. I appreciate that you devoted your time and you know efforts. Thank you so much. And we have a small party, a classical I mean, I would say even closer to libertarian than classical liberals. Let's say classical liberal party. This party is having for the last 20 years having between 1.5% and 2% of votes. But we suggested, you know, in our radio show after our first meeting, when you contaminated me with this leap zone idea, we suggested that this party should acquire this concept for creating leap zone as a main agenda for them. And I think they're going to do it, you know, because we have some. It was like 3 weeks ago. So for the last 3 weeks, I had at least 10, 12 messages saying that the bosses of the party, they call it New Rightist Congress, that they are considering this leap zones. So with this, so this is a good start. The good chances, because we will have an election pretty soon. Then,
when do you think you would have elections? When would that be?
The first election, there will be the first confrontation, political confrontation, major, is next year, where we have the European Parliament, European Union Parliament election, and then we have next election is I believe it's 2015, the great one for a parliament. But the Poland economy is, the government says that it's improving, but it's not improving. At least people are unhappy. So people are going to be more unhappier. So that's a good for us, because
absolutely.
It's like starving Chinese, right? They were there was a sort of a good point for.
It means people are open to change instead of being closed to change.
Right. We have a libertarian party, and plenty of entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, business-oriented people who are, most of them, they are libertarian. They don't even know that they are libertarian. They know, they follow, they accept, they comply with the libertarian concept and philosophy. So the atmosphere is good. People are very well educated. They feel it. They like it. They are ambitious. They are proud. They don't want to go to, you know what happens? 2 million left, let's 5-6 years ago, 2 million people, they moved to England and Ireland, and they now many of them, they're coming back. And those most sophisticated are coming back. So,
what do they say when they come back?
They open businesses. They look for business. Unfortunately, some of them, they come back and they re-come back. I mean, they go back, to England or Ireland. But many of them, they start, so the same time, when we start a sleep zone, we're gonna start, startup communities here.
That's right.
Our group is creating, the first startup community in Poland, because that's what we need. We know people who are having good ideas, but they don't know how to sell it. They don't know how to find financing. The venture capital is coming. The angel, business angels are growing. So this community is stronger and stronger. So probably they will, 2 weeks after opening first Leap Zone, we will have at least 100,000, at least formally registered in our zone, 100,000 business people. Okay.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. And what you're saying is very significant about the people who leave and come back, because what that demonstrates are two things. Mm-hmm. That the people who leave, if there was the opportunity to find what they're looking for, a legal, economic, administrative, political jurisdiction within their own country, that would be their top preference. There's a demand for this. And with the political party that gets 1%, well, that's probably because what they're asking is for people to vote for their ideology. And people are never going to vote for an ideology in large numbers. People will vote for a benefit.
Empirical, like you said, empirical. They are empirical. They want to
exactly.
Practice. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mark,
yeah.
I think if they use this agenda, they can have a 5, maybe 7%. We have in Poland the limit, if you have a 5%, then you go to parliament. If below 5%, there's a ceiling, and you are not elected to the.
My suggestion: sit down with a couple of your economist friends, at least one of whom I know, and start with a slogan. And the slogan is 2 million new jobs. 2 million new jobs.
Okay. That's great. Okay.
And that should be the slogan and the single issue of the party. The leap zone should not be the issue. The issue should be 2 million.
I know,
new
of
jobs.
course. Leap zone it's a mean. It's a way to.
The mechanics. It's the mechanics.
Yeah.
And then have the economists design technical supporting arguments that demonstrate why that's a realistic projection of how many new jobs would be created and in what time frame if you create the most competitive economic space within the European Union using legal, economic, administrative, and political elements.
Mark,
I would suggest they talk about that and nothing else. 2 million new jobs.
Our companion, he would like to ask you one question, and that's it. Okay, yeah. Christopher, start.
Christopher.
Okay, my question is about your opinion on a similar initiative, namely seasteading. What are your thoughts about it? Are you familiar with the Seasteading Institute and their?
Yes, I've heard of seasteading. What's different about seasteading is that they're not working within the framework of existing nation states. They're looking to create communities at sea. So they want to use the law of the sea and create spaces that would be independent of nation states. I think it's very experimental. And I think it's the sort of thing that needs to be evaluated based on, on what sort of results eventually come along. It seems to me that in terms of the preferences of people, I think there will always be an truly overwhelming preference of people to live on land than rather at sea. Whether that's on a ocean liner cruise ship, or whether that's on a floating platform or a fixed platform. There's some very creative and smart people who have, very creative ideas around that. And they've started with some project where they're going to have like software programmers who can be working on a boat or a platform offshore, so they don't have to get an immigration visa to go to the U.S. They'll be near, but not inside the U.S. My guess is that it's a sort of thing that for small groups of people may seem interesting. In terms of a solution for 38 million people in Poland, I think leap zones is a fast and real and practical solution. So, but I think it's great that a lot of people have different ideas. I think part of the concept is it's not about everyone having the same idea. It's not imposing one idea on people who believe something different.
Okay, thanks for your answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. And we can talk to Pat Friedman because he's I assume that he's our ally for leap zones.
In fact, when we did the first constitutional changes in Honduras, for the special leap zones in Honduras on land, Patrick Friedman, one of the leaders of seasteading, formed a small investor group that came to Honduras with the goal to develop a project on land in Honduras. So I think that to some degree, I don't know what happened with that, but at least at that moment, it seemed that part of the people in the seasteading community of interest were equally excited of getting involved in a project that would take place on land under the flag of Honduras within the legal, economic, administrative, political framework of a leap zone. So obviously there are some common objectives in creating a better spaces for people.
Okay, Dr. Klugman, thank you so much for helping us, for hoping us, and we most likely we get back to you. We are going to notify you about the project and how is it going to work, and we hope to see you in Poland next spring. At least to celebrate a 10th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's death, which is beginning of June, but we can make it around end of May, beginning of June, and then we will organize a large seminar for with those ideas, to make more people understanding what is our goal, and this is good for all of us. Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of day. We're gonna go to sleep in Poland. You are in Salvador, right? Right now?
Right. Today I'm in El Salvador. Yesterday I was in Honduras. Yes.
I know. So we would like to be there because and now there's a rain and cold in Poland, but we are jealous for your environment. Thank you so much. Have a nice day, and see you soon.
Thank you so much, Jan. Best of luck with all of your work. Congratulations.
Okay.
Bye-bye now.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Bye, Chris.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye, Christoph. Thank you.